Thank you for being with us this morning. Now, let's get the program started. Barely a week after President Buhari appointed Usman Alkali Baba as the new acting Inspector General of Police, he has unveiled a new policing vision and crime-fighting strategies for the Nigeria Police. We will look at the new policing strategies and other tasks ahead of the new acting IG. And to do this with us this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome the Executive Director, Rule of Law and Accountability Advocacy Center, Mr. Okechukwu Nwaguma. Good morning.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And we have two former policemen joining us virtually. The former police PRO, Mr. Emmanuel Ojukwu, who joins us from Enugu. Good morning, Mr. Ojukwu. As well as Mr. Fatai Owosheni, who is the Special Advisor on Security Matters to the Oyo State Governor. Thank you very much all for joining us this morning. Now, let me start with you, Mr. Nwaguma. What are your thoughts regarding these new strategies that the acting IG has unveiled?
Well, I have a little problem with this discussion because we are talking about an acting Inspector General of Police who was appointed following a procedure that is contrary to the Constitution and the Police Act. And I think that...
that's a whole new dimension.
Yeah. I mean, we can't be certain.
He was illegally appointed.
His appointment is illegal, just as the extension of the tenure of the former retired IGP by the president was also illegal. So, and I think that we need to start from the standpoint of the president breaking his streak of illegalities. The president needs to lead by example and stop and comply with the law in government processes. But I mean,
what process did you expect him to follow?
The Constitution and the Police Act are very clear about the procedure for the appointment of an Inspector General of Police. He must appoint them on the advice of the Police Council. The new Police Act, which he signed in 2020, makes the meeting of the Police Council mandatory. By the time the Minister of Police Affairs announced the president's approval of the appointment of an acting IGP, he was still in London. And of course, the minister also confirmed the Police Council has, because that question was put to him, that the council had not met. So this appointment is, and in any case, there is no contemplation of an acting IGP under the law. So everything about this appointment is illegal. And so there's a legitimacy problem.
Okay, let's quickly get the opinion of the two policemen who are with us this morning. Mr. Ojukwu, what are your thoughts about this problem that he just raised?
Nwaguma is entitled to his opinion on the issue of the appointment of IG. I do agree that under the law, there is no provision for an acting IG. That creates a whole lot of problems for the police leadership. When somebody is on acting capacity, he begins to pander to some wishes and some desires for him to be confirmed. It doesn't speak well for this country. The Constitution said that there should be an IG appointed by the president on the advice of the Police Council, and not for the president to appoint an acting IG and then thereafter wait for the council to ratify rubber stamp. It is contrary to the law. The proper thing ought to be done, and even also to follow in line with the new Police Act, like my friend just earlier mentioned. But that does not make the appointment illegal, so to speak. I do know that the council will sit eventually and ratify it. There should be no vacancy on the seat of the Inspector General of Nigeria because there are a lot of issues to be dealt with. Somebody is there already and he has to hit the ground running, which he has done. And that, I believe, is why we're here to discuss the roadmap.
Okay, Mr. Owosheni, quickly, in one or two sentences, your opinion about this.
I don't think I want to join issues as to legality and as to what the law has prescribed. Once there is a vacancy, once the office of the IG is declared vacant, whoever that is probably the most senior, whether named by the president as acting IG or not named, it's assumed that the person will follow suit. And in this case, whether the person is appointed legally or not, the person that is sitting down there now as acting IG is apparently the most senior police officer after the former IG was removed. So,
okay, thank you, Mr. Wojeni. Thank you. We will just take a short break now and come back and actually go into the substance of this topic.
Nigeria's 21st Indigenous Inspector General of Police arrives at the State House ahead of his decoration. The Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshinbajo, performs the decoration ceremony in the presence of the wife of the new police chief, as well as the outgoing Inspector General of Police, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, and the Minister of Police Affairs, Mr. Maigarit Ngyadi. Professor Oshinbajo also gave a charge to the new police boss.
Under your leadership, the police must now rebuild, in some ways also, the broken bridges of trust with the public and regain the confidence of the citizenry. This is an ongoing challenge, it's an ongoing task that the police force and all of the senior members of the police force must take on as a responsibility.
The new IG of police is aware of the task ahead of him, and he declares he is prepared to tackle the challenge.
I came in at a very challenging time. I know it, I recognize it, and I will work on how to improve from where my predecessor has left.
At the force headquarters, the #1 police officer inspects a guard of honor. He proceeds to the conference hall for the traditional handing over of baton, and then he sees off his predecessor. In his maiden address, he promises to ensure that the police is restored as a major force in the country.
The task of restoring the primacy of Nigerian police in the internal security architecture of the country is the main challenge ahead of all of us. It is, however, a task that I am convinced we can surmount if we resolve as a people to partner and present a common front against the subversive and criminal elements who are the common enemies of the whole nation.
Nevertheless, he has a word of advice for the officers.
I am mindful of the yearnings of Nigerians for a policing system that will not only assure them of their safety, but treat them with civility and hold their human rights sacred.
As he settles down to business, the task ahead of him is well cut out and is expected to tackle the security challenges ahead of the country.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. Yes, now that we have finished talking about the legality or otherwise of this appointment.
So have we really?
Well, we haven't agreed whether it is legal or not, but we have discussed it. So it's open for discussion, guys. The discussion continues. In the meantime, so he is there as the acting IG. Whether that post exists by the Constitution or not is immaterial at this time. He has been appointed the acting IG, and he has put some strategies in place. He has said exactly what he wants to do to reform the police. You used to be in a body that was looking at the reforms in the police.
I'm still in the body, really.
Good. So what are your thoughts about these suggestions that he has made?
Well, speaking on the assumption that we have an IGP who is legally appointed, I do not really envy any person appointed as Inspector General of Police of the Nigerian Police Force. And the reason is that we will be expecting magic of anybody with the police force the way it is currently constituted. The police needs overhauling. It needs rebranding. It needs transformation. It needs funding. Today, the police officers themselves are targets of attacks on a daily basis. They can't even defend themselves. And so, what about the ordinary citizens they are set up and charged to? So we need to begin to, first of all, address how do we equip the police? How do we empower the police? How do we increase intelligence, investigative, and operational capacity to enable the police to discharge their primary function of protecting the citizens? Now, the police trust fund was set up because it became clear that the federal government, which has the sole responsibility of security, could not adequately fund the police. And so we came about with the idea of a police trust fund, which was set up in 2018. Nobody's asking questions. The funds for the trust fund are supposed to come from the federal the contributions, certain percentage from the federal government, from companies, from donations and so forth. We're not asking questions about how much has the trust fund received, how much has it disbursed. How come we have not seen any change in terms of funding and operations and effectiveness in the police 2 years after the trust fund?
I'm sorry, Mr. Wagomo, if you don't mind, I think maybe we should consider what are some other things that the money itself will do. Perhaps because there's those who feel that the problem is not only or first of all about money, but about operations. So let me ask you, Mr. Ojukwu, what would you say are the real issues that the police is having that any IGP must address? There are those who feel, for instance, in the wake of the attacks on police infrastructure in Imo State, there was a lot more wrong than just money. For instance, there was surveillance, and according to the DSS, the information got across to the police, yet nothing was done. And it's not something that just happened once or twice. It happened like 2 or 3 times successively. Maybe not on a regular number of days, but at least they happened so back to back that people began to wonder exactly what is wrong. That's not just a problem of money, is it, Mr. Ojukwu?
Money is a key factor in policing Nigeria. But let's not talk about money. We're looking at a police force that is highly demobilized, and that demobilized because of money, lack of money. We're looking at a police force that is highly demotivated, because of poor funding, poor remuneration, poor take-home, poor welfare. We're also looking at a police force that has been humiliated by Nigerians. The NSAS protests and the toll it took on the police is calamitous. Many officers have become so demoralized because they saw those they were working for or serving, even roasting them and eating them as meat. We saw cannibalism in the 21st century being done on policemen. So the workforce, apart from being demotivated, they have a low morale. So the new IG has a lot of work to do to revamp the morale of the policemen. Let their fighting spirit be returned. Let police become again an organization that can dominate a situation and assert herself. So the police needs a lot of psychological retuning Any reformation now has to be on the psychology of the policemen, their morale, and their ability to face the onerous task of policing this nation. The new IG is coming at a time when there are fights to be fought from many fronts. It's coming at a time that information highway is loaded with so many things to be dealt with. But those to deal with it, the men are not in the proper shape. They need to be reinvigorated. I'm talking about their morale. Now,
Mr.
talking about intelligence and information.
Exactly. Because, I mean, you've talked about all of the morale thing. If I can just take you up on one, we'll come back to that intelligence, please. Let's keep our tabs there. But you said that, you know, the NSAS occasion or event demonstrated that people do not trust the police. But don't also forget that the NSAS campaign didn't just start in October last year. It's something that has been on for years, like 2 or 3 IGPs before what happened, last year, such that people had been calling for a revamp of the SARS unit over and over again because of their extra brief activities, if I can use that term, such that they do things that is outside of their brief. And it is not something that is new. People have been calling for attention to SARS for a very long time, and nothing was happening. And this, activities, human rights abuses and all continued almost untamed. So what we saw last year was like a boil over. It wasn't something that was intended to go that way if it had been attended to earlier. So it's the question that I'm asking now is the general operations of the police that over the years has gotten to the point where people now do not trust the police, even from the mouth of the new acting IGP. So what are the things that are responsible for that in the first place?
Okay, the trust gap between the police and the public did not start today. We must still cast our minds back to the history of the police. The police wasn't created to be a friendly force. It wasn't created by Nigeria and by Nigerians. It was a force of domination to cause atrocities on Nigerians. That was done by the colonial masters. And we as Nigerians, since we became independent, we have not thought it fit to restructure our police, to make it our own police and not colonial police. We didn't give the police a guiding law. It was only last year that we had the Police Act, after 75 years. So the old police was operating on the old law, on the old psyche, on the old mentality. Now that we own the police, the transformation has to be gradual. We need to reorient our policemen to work in line with the dictates of democracy.
Mr. Ojukwu, just a moment. While what you say is quite valid in the eye of the law from all that you have said, but over these years that you have talked about, all the policemen have been Nigerians. So they should, I believe, have enough nationalism or patriotism in their hearts to say, I'm policing my people. I should have a Nigerian interest as opposed to a dominant or a tendency to dominate other people. Don't you think that is something that should have been inculcated into them at the point of training?
Thank you. You see, when we began this discourse, you wanted to minimize the influence of fund. You can't throw it away. I don't know if you have paid a visit to any of the police training institutions. There's no policeman that I know who is a boy. They're all men, 18 years and above. And they come into the police with their mindset, with attitudes from years back in their homes and in their communities. And within these communities and schools, people already have the impression that the police is a force of domination, that the police is unfriendly. Now, while you are in the school, in the training institutions, in line with the police, to begin to give these new recruits, new policemen to be the proper orientation. But where is the motivation to train them? What facilities? In a classroom in the police college, close to you there. You have 500 recruits to be trained by one person. No vision, no public address system. They don't go to range. They are humiliated while in training. They are not fed. They defecate in the open. We dehumanize them. And equity, if you want equity, they say you must do equity. You must come with clean hands. If you've not trained them properly, don't expect them to perform miracle or to do wonders. So it still boils down to funding and Nigeria's attitude to their police. We still see the police as a different police force, but it's our police. If we want this police, train them properly, motivate them properly, they will perform. It is said that action and reaction are equal and opposite. Many of us see the police as the dregs, as the never do well, as armed, as dirty and whatever. And these are Nigerians, you know, who have bona fide claim to this country. They go to the same schools, they go to the same markets, and they know what is happening in this country. And they have the right to stop you from further insult. So when such reactions occur, it requires an inward looking. The new IG has to look into the police force and reorientate the attitude of the officers for more friendliness, because the public are yearning for better services.
Okay.
It takes two to tango. The
All right,
police should not be thrown away.
Mr. Juku, that point has been made. Let me throw this to Mr. Oshini. I don't know if you have anything to say about all that we have talked about so far. I agree completely that yes, and everyone else would agree that to a large extent the police is underfunded. Otherwise, we would have more than the number of policemen that we have now. They would be better kitted. They would have better vehicles. But the question that we want to ask is it first of all about money or the general operational modes of the police at this time?
Thank you very much. I will probably slightly differ from some of the submissions that have been made. I want to first seize this opportunity to congratulate the new IG, but I don't envy him. I wonder when IGs are appointed in Nigeria, whether they are appointed to fail or succeed. And I will go historical. We must first know and accept something, that the police is the symbol of government and the society. I've always referred to the Willing Commission of 1957. General Aguiyi-Ironsi then, the head of state and chairman of the Supreme Military Council, made a statement that the police have become an indispensable organ of a government in any civilized community. They have powerful elements in the strength and weakness of any nation. Indeed, as law enforcement and corrective agencies, their role in the mainstream of any society is distinctively important. As the government taking this into consideration at all? They've talked about a new police act. They've talked about having a new Nigerian police. The new police act itself is faulty. The new police act has not been subjected to the police council that administers the police. There are so many flaws in that police act itself. I personally don't believe that that police act will lead Nigeria police to anywhere. What matters most, and why I have given this background, is it is the political element, that is, the government itself, the political class, that determine the direction of a country and how the police is going to perform. The new Inspector General of Police, I remember talking to Ayola last night when she talked about setting an agenda for the new Inspector General of Police. We don't need to set an agenda for him. The IG knows what is happening in the country. He already has his job cut out for him. Having his job cut out for him, he must have a strength of character. I don't know whether it is possible for any IG to say, if I'm not given the wherewithal to discharge on my responsibilities, I want to leave. It is not until when we have such a situation, it may sound radical. If you have a situation like in Imo State, attacking the police headquarters is never had in history. You have an Inspector General of Police that you've given such responsibilities. You don't even have the strength. They must start recruiting heavily, not just recruiting. The firing, the tactical unit of the Nigeria Police, the police mobile force, is already moribund, sort of. You are going to post 10 policemen, 10 mobile policemen to a point who are supposed to be fully armed, because that is what the PMF is for. You have 10 policemen with 2 rifles guarding the place. How many police command headquarters can boast of having a standby unit of a mobile police that is armed? So my take is that it's not just about the Inspector General of Police. He has a role to play. He has to, accept the fact that some of the criticisms and whatever about the police are legitimate ones. The disquiet being expressed by the people are legitimate ones. But it cannot solve the problem if the political class, the political element, starting from the office of the president up to the National Assembly, if they don't provide the wherewithal, we're just talking rhetorics. The police that we have today is not capable of policing this country, not until when the wherewithal is provided. So I would pray for the IG to have the courage, to have the strength of character, to be able to speak the truth to the authority. It should also have the courage and the character to listen to his management team, his tactical operation officers, to be able to speak the truth to him. If we don't do that, we will just be, lamenting every time. The IG should be able to assemble all whatever reform papers, see the ones that the office of the IG can implement without even running to the ministry. That is my take.
Well, there are so many issues to that, because so if he has to look at all the reforms, we have to go back all the way to 1922. But we'll talk about more of that, when we return from this break. So do stay with us.
This is the inaugural meeting of the Acting Inspector General of Police with all the senior police officers from the rank of Commissioners of Police and above. This strategic meeting gives the police chief an opportunity to review the strategies that would help in restoring order and public confidence.
I must re-emphasize that the major task ahead of us is to address the threats of succession, banditry, kidnapping, armed robbery, and the other sundry violent crimes within the shortest possible time and change the narratives, and return our beloved nation to the path of peace, unity, and national security. The reality, however, is that more grounds need to be covered if we are to restore public confidence. I am confident that we can surmount this task, as the Nigeria Police is endowed with some of the finest, courageous, patriotic officers who have consistently demonstrated the capacity to step over institutional challenges to confront crimes.
He orders some reorganization in the force as a way of restoring professionalism and addressing citizens' concerns on rights abuse.
To our post-reorganization plan, as well as our commitment to return to the basic policing, I have directed the immediate reform of the IGP monitoring unit, which is one of the major complaints I have received as soon as coming into office. This involved the disbandment of the satellite offices of the unit in Lagos and Port Harcourt, the streamlining of the personnel profile of the unit at the force headquarters to a number not more than 50, the banning of the unit from undertaking any criminal investigation, including taking over cases from commands. Under the current dispensation, the unit will only operate within their original mandate, which is to investigate complaints of professional infractions that may be alleged against any serving member, and as may be referred to them by the Office of the Inspector General of Police.
The recent pattern of crime, which indicates an increasing threat to internal security, has been a major concern to both the security agencies and the public. Many in this hall are optimistic that the short and long-term strategies of the police chief would hopefully see an end to this trend as soon as possible.
Thanks for staying with us. Mr. Waguma, we've talked about a lot of things, the issues that the police have on their hands. Yes, money definitely plays a lot of role, but the question, let me take it from where Mr. I think it was Mr. Wosheni, stopped about reforms and everything, and you have led the way, so to speak, in that for a while. I also remember, if you do a simple Google search about police reforms in Nigeria, you will find out that there's all kinds of need for all kinds of reforms. Civil service reforms, police reforms, and stuff like that. When we talk about police reforms, exactly what? Is it just these issues that we're talking about? Or the operational arrangement of the police? Or the administrative, end of the police? How significant is this reform to the entire security architecture that we're talking about in Nigeria?
Well, police reform is all-encompassing. It seeks to address all the challenges that impede effective and professional policing. But of course, with respect to Nigeria, the first thing is just like Mr. Ojukwu rightly said. Nigeria inherited, institutions and culture of the colonial police. And the new Police Act and all the efforts over the years has been to try to change the vision and mission of the police from a force of occupation that, sees its mission to be to suppress, rather than to a police that serves and protects. So change that vision and mission. And that is why, if you look at the new Police Act, it starts with general principles, issues about respect for human rights, partnership with the community, accountability, and all that, service to the people. And so what it requires then is to begin to implement these new inclusions. For example, in the same Police Act that I talked about, because issues of funding has, like we said, it makes provision for what is called policing plan. That the Inspector General of Police must come up with an annual policing plan, which will set out the objectives of policing, the priorities, the cost, and the expected outcome. And to each of these, the plan will be attached a budget, so that at the end of the year, you are able to assess how the police has been able to achieve its plan over the years. And fortunately, again, the same act has provided for a secured tenure for the IGP. Before now, no IGP was sure of how long the president could just, by a tweet, he could just wake up in the morning and tweet to sack an IGP. But under the present dispensation, he cannot do that. The IGP must be appointed for a secured tenure of 4 years. And for him to be removed, the police council the president must also consult. He cannot just wake up. But the question is whether the president will even respect the law in respect of all these things we are saying. Okay. So yeah. So okay. if you really look at the Police Act, you know that, it's not a perfect document, but for the first time in over 75 years, like Mr. rightly said, we now have a new framework, legal framework to govern policing in a democracy. Okay.
Mr. Ojukwu, Mr. Maguna spoke about a police force that was given to us, by the colonial masters. And we left these colonial masters 60-odd years ago. And we all know that policemen go, at least the officers, go for training abroad. And I'm sure some of them have also been to the country of the ex-colonial master for training and learned how policing is done over there, and being part of a policing that is not to oppress the one being colonized. So how come in 60 years we have not been able to bring some of that training to bear on our own policing in Nigeria?
Thank you. I have heard it said several times that you cannot build anything from nothing. Since the ground norm of policing was based on colonial dictates, there's nothing you can add to it except you remove that foundation, which is what the Police Act has just begun to do. Many of us have attended courses. Many officers are even attending courses right now in foreign countries. We've had interfaces in the course of peacekeeping operations, in course of training, to interact with police forces from all over the world. Nigerian police officers have been so well trained in those areas. But the number is minute. This is the largest police force, I think, so in Africa, south of the Sahara. Very, very big, and has enormous responsibilities. But there is a strong training deficit in the police force. Now, when two or three officers go abroad on course, they return. They have to do whatever they've learned in the same system that is flawed. There's what is called conditioning. You adapt to your environment. If you come with such material, such ideas to implement, and you are not the commander of that area, the system will drown you, make you to play according to the rule. What is that rule? The police has not been so factored to operate efficiently. I had a colleague, a senior colleague, I think TPL Liberty said some time ago, that the police is about life and property. Every Nigerian has life, has property, and the police are the one to protect that life and the property. But what is our attitude to this police? Now, when you train officers and talk to them on best practices, they will situate you within the environment where they operate. Is it possible to operate in that way? Now, elsewhere in this world, policemen have body cameras. They have so many gadgets. In fact, they use public phone. But here, every Nigerian policeman uses his own mobile phone to make calls and to do so many things. Some drive themselves to their offices, use their money to buy fuel for vehicles. Everything is still there. The environment is not conducive for proper policing. We have to make the environment conducive for these young men and women to give of their best. Anytime police officers from Nigeria go abroad on peacekeeping operations, they are rated as the best. Why? Because they've suffered so much in this country, and once they have a little leeway of where things are easy, they excel above the indigenous of that area because the environment is conducive. Let us Nigerians make the environment of policing conducive. Let these men be properly recruited, properly trained, properly remunerated, and let us have an attitude to them that they are part of us and they are not renegade elements that could be roasted and be eaten on the streets and nobody will raise an eyebrow. Let us treat our police well and we'll get the best out of them.
Well, interesting perspective right there, Mr. Juku. Well, Mr. Ojenu, you talked about, the need for us to, you referenced the Imo occurrence the other time, and it begs the question of intelligence and how or not such intelligence is used. You are not unaware, for instance, that the DSS had said that, there were leads passed on to the police, and but that about 2 days or thereabout before the attacks, and nothing was done. So in this new light now, one wants to ask the question, what are those things that were left undone? What are those things that led to that vulnerability of the police? And what should we do, both from the federal level down to the state commands and the zones, to ensure that such a thing does not repeat itself anymore? Because just as you said, it is unheard of that we should have a tax on police infrastructure.
Thank you so much. It will continue to repeat itself if the fundamental, the roots of why you are having this are not addressed. and what is the fundamentals. You know, recognizing the police as it is, as the symbol of government and society. We can do so many, we can set up so many reform committees. We can continue to lament like this. We can continue to change the Inspector Generals of Police if we don't address the root causes. That is, see the police as the symbol of government, as the lead agency in internal security, stop balkanizing and decimating the police, and making a fraction bigger than the whole. That is, the country needs to see the police as an institution that must be adequately catered for. You know, I mentioned a situation where you have the striking arm of the police PMN, people that are there already tired. To put in more people there, the strength from which to take from is not there. You go to some of the police stations now in the remote part of the country, you will see 5 policemen in a police outpost or police division. Out of the 5 policemen, only 1 is carrying rifles. And we continue to, do all this lamentation. Somehow, personally, I want to say I'm sad when people talk of the new police act as having addressed police problems. There is virtually nothing that is in the new police act that is not in the old police act. Is the wherewithal and the courage of the leadership of the police and the police officers and men themselves to adhere to that. If you don't have a mechanism for a conduct and discipline monitoring, professional standard units and all whatever, when we used to have the MSD department, management service department that check all that, you can have all those things. If you don't really have what it takes to carry out this. They mentioned about NSAS. What is it that caused NSAS? The people are talking of police brutality and whatever. The appalling nature of police cells itself, the sad environment which policemen they live in is enough to make people to complain. It is not just about the individual. It's not the policeman on the street that will build a cell. What the best practices says, we want to copy from abroad and whatever, is that you should have a police cell that you can separate men and women and children, and where suspects would be adequately taken care of to an extent. So already, once you are putting anybody in police cell before you carry him to the court, you have already dehumanized him. And it's not the policeman that will provide that. So my basic thing will still be that the government should be ready to make the Inspector General of Police to succeed. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure we are ready to have a police. It is until when the government is ready to say that we have appointed an IG, we want the police to succeed, and give him what it takes. Don't keep on balkanizing the police. Don't keep on, transferring the work that police should do to institutions that at the end of the day will not perform, and you will still come and blame the Inspector General of Police. So it is a big challenge that everything you must go to the root, and the root is proper funding, training, get the right mindset for the people that are managing the police. Once you are able to do that, all the countries we are mentioning, they have a culture. It is everything they do is tied to their culture. We've been talking about community policing here. You can't put something on nothing. In those countries, they have this culture of civic obligations, volunteering, which we don't have. You are talking of body cameras. Is that what is going to solve police problem? It's not what is going to solve police problem. You must reorientate the people as well. The police will reflect society where it works. The performance and conduct of police officers is a factor of the conduct of the populace and the society. That's my take.
Okay, Mr. Mwakuma, let's go back to the IG now and his vision. Some of the highlights of this vision include deploying cutting-edge policing technology and integrating intelligence-led policing practices to core policing functions with a view to strengthening police capacity to stabilize the internal security order and restore public confidence in the force. How do you see him achieving this in light of all these things that we have spoken about this morning?
You know, I started by saying that I do not envy anybody who is appointed inspector.
All three of you have said the same.
Yeah, because what they need to effectively do what they need to do is not there. The police investigator is unable to investigate, carry out simple investigation because there is no fund to do that. The police cannot move from point A to point B to investigate. They rely on the complainant for what they call mobilization. And then when you arrest, this whole idea of bribe for bail is all part of efforts to raise revenue. So the police, denied of funds, they are forced to look for other means of generating revenue. When you see police going out on raids, I agree with you that in Lagos, for example, cultism is an issue. But most of the times when you see them raiding places in the pretext of looking for cultists, it is not so. Everybody arrested is made to pay money because the point is about to raise money. So it has become it has turned, denying the police resources creates room for violence and corruption.
Just a moment. On this that you have just said now, I mean, if that is what the police does, that is clear infraction on human rights.
No, absolutely. So and I was going there.
Who is questioning them?
I was going there. You know that what I've just described now, because on a daily basis, our organization monitor police conduct. So we're not saying things that we imagine. We're saying things we see. It is this kind of situation that incrementally led to NSAS. And just like we knew, after NSAS, it doesn't seem to me that much has changed. Because as a matter of fact, when the police, initially they were no longer around. They were not. You don't find them in the stations. You go there, you don't see anybody. But when they returned, they came back with a vengeance. So we are still seeing those things that happened, and they're happening again. And the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that if people are not to be compelled as to resort, to rebellion as a last resort, that human rights must be protected by the rule of law. So the reason that people don't have confidence in the police is because, one, they view the police as being ineffective in addressing their concerns, in protecting them. They also violate human rights. And I've told you that human rights is encouraged when police are denied what they need to work, and so they resort to other means, and in the process, corruption, human rights. So at the end of the day, everything turns back to equipping the police, training, equipment, the police. I started by mentioning police trust fund here. The purpose of that trust fund is equipment, training, and retraining. We are not asking questions, what is the police trust fund doing? Now, police stations have been burnt everywhere. How are we going to rebuild them? What is the place of the police trust fund? You expect the IG to perform with what? There are no resources. The men are demoralized.
Okay. Mr. Ojukwu, what would be your last words on this, because we're gradually winding down? Well, clearly, the task before the new acting IG is, as you said, clear.
Myriad.
And he himself, as we have all identified, seems to have held it. If you were to advise him to prioritize, what would it be?
Well, first is to advise Nigerians, the political elite, and the government to allow the IG to do his job as a trained police officer. He has come a long way, he knows it. He should be allowed to do it. There's too much political interference in policing that even where the man has good intentions to make the police live up to their billings, somebody out there will they stick on the IG. You affect my affair, and then we blame the IG, we blame the system. When we who are
Well, we've got that. We're gradually winding down. But Mr. Osheni, you as well, if you can just give us your last words.
In one sentence.
I will pray for the IG. He should do things the way he knows that he will serve humanity, recognize the fact that as an Inspector General of Police, and put it in the minds of the police that their loyalty is to the Constitution of this country, that the police should not be apolitical at any point in time. That would be my advice for him.
Very much, gentlemen. I'm sorry, we've completely run out of time. All that's left for me just to say thank you to all of you. Mr. Fatai Owosheni, Special Advisor on Security Matters to the Oyo State Governor. Mr. Emmanuel Ojukwu, former police PRO, who joined us, both of whom joined us virtually, as well as Mr. Okechukwu Nwaguma, Executive Director, Rule of Law and Accountability Advocacy Center, who was with us in our studios in Lagos. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming to share your insights with us. Sunrise will be right back with another interesting conversation. Do stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. Now, let's look at the state of population. Nearly half of all women are denied their bodily autonomy. That's according to the UNFPA. My body is my own. For the first time, the United Nations Population Fund's flagship report, State of the World Population, focuses on bodily autonomy. Now, you would wonder, what exactly does that mean? It is the power and agency to make choices about your body without fear of violence or having someone else decide for you. This lack of bodily autonomy has massive implications beyond the profound harms to individual women and girls. Potentially depressing economic productivity, undercutting skills, and resulting in extra costs to healthcare and judicial systems. Now, to talk to us about this, which seems to be, well, a novel idea to many of us, is the resident representative, United Nations Population Fund in Nigeria, Ula Muller. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Ula.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Good morning. Now, what is this about my body is my own? Of course, my body is my own.
Well, it is, but we also have to be realistic about, we live in a world where, for many reasons, very often a woman do not have the power to decide about her own body. And we are experiencing that the amount of power a woman has over her own body is clearly linked to how many human rights or decision-making powers that she has over other aspects of her life. So this is around the right to work, the right to education, the right to seek healthcare without your husband's or partner's consent or permission. Of course, the right to decide the number and spacing of her children, even if she wants to have children. So there's a lot of things where what happens to a woman's body is actually out of her control because the decision-making about her body is done in a different space. So all these things are also clearly linked to population issues. And if this is not addressed, we cannot continue to close our eyes to it because it can have dire consequences on development and achieving sustainable development. So that is why we have also chosen for this report to focus on women, because women are the most disadvantaged of the sexes, because women are the ones who most often do not have control over their lives and their choices. They are the sex that are often not involved in decision-making about their own lives and their own bodies. And we need to change that.
Well, we're talking population, and the emphasis seems to be on women. Don't the men play any role in this?
Of course they do. And ideally, we would want to have a situation where we have full equality between men and women and where decisions are made based on a conversation. But ultimately, it is a woman's decision what she wants to happen to her body. She wants to, it's her decision if and when she wants to have children, just like it's also up to men if they want someone to do anything to them. They have their own decision-making authority. And women have to have that too. But in the ideal world, that is an equal conversation between people that are equal, but ultimately respect that the one who makes the decision and has the power for the final decision is the one whose body is going to be impacted.
What would you say, what necessitated this conversation in the first place? What was it? It would seem like you have talked around it, but if you could, talk to us about what made it necessary to come up with this report, to even, take on this foray in the first place?
As I said, what we are experiencing globally, and also you will also notice Nigeria is one of the countries we have featured in the report, is that, for instance, when we talk about early and child marriage, women are very often not, or young girls are not in a position where they make decisions. When it comes to childbearing, very often it would be the in-laws or the husbands who decide. When it comes to decisions about, we also talk a lot about gender-based violence. That's also about bodily autonomy, because no woman should have to be exposed to that. And if that happens, she should have rights to say no. So this is about everything. It's also about ensuring that, a lot of women who are pregnant because of the expectations to her, a lot of young girls who are coming into early childhood marriages also then end up not having an education because they get pregnant. So their bodily integrity and autonomy is really so closely linked to that lack of agency about making your own decisions. And what we see is that in unequal societies, decisions about women's lives and bodies are made by the men. So it is, as I said, it is a tricky, it's a sensitive conversation, but it's a really important conversation to have. Yeah.
Yes, it is a sensitive conversation to have because of cultural leanings, especially in Nigeria. The number of children I'm going to have will probably depend on how many children my husband wants. And many times we don't know anything about birth control, so we just have children.
Yeah. So, and this is where it becomes so important that we are aware about the fact that there are some rights attached to us as individuals, right? Because when you don't have control over your own body, a woman's life will be fraught with the losses to integrity and autonomy, as I talked about, that's linked to that lack of agency. And that means that you can say that when we talk about contraceptives, right? So a lot of these losses that comes out of not having the power to make your own decisions are linked then to lack of contraceptive choices. And that leads to unplanned pregnancies. And they very often result from terrible bargains where unwanted sex is exchanged, for peace in the family, or they run through violations such as, other things, and very closely linked to child marriage. And also just remember, a lot of unplanned pregnancies is also coming for young girls. They're not all off in marriage. We have a high rate of teenage pregnancy, and that's linked to poverty. So an unplanned pregnancy for her would be a result from a terrible bargain where unwanted sex is an exchange for home and food because she has no other mechanisms she can turn to cope. And the same also happened through violations such as female genital mutilation or cutting. It's not the girl's choice to be cut when she is still a young child. And that has huge implications for her health for the remainder of her life. So that's why we sort of have based also this report around the three guiding questions about who usually makes decisions about healthcare, who makes decisions on whether or not you should use contraception, and can you actually say no to your husband or partner if you don't want to have a sexual intercourse at any specific time. So it's as I said, and you also reckon, it's tricky, but it's about that information, right to information. A woman should have a right to access information about how she can make her own decisions about her own body. So that's where we start. Information.
Just one moment on that. Let me follow up on Alera's question. On one hand, is the place of the human right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, is the place of culture, just as she has said. So there's that delicate balance. Now, the third leg is the Leave No One Behind slogan of the United Nations concerning the SDG, one of which cases involves poverty, which you also referenced. Now, these are very, very delicate issues. How do we balance the place of your rights as an individual with the place of culture, which is the way of life of a people?
Yeah, so this is indeed a very difficult conversation. I think it starts with a conversation. I think everything starts with us, all of us, trying to keep an open mind. And that means every participant in a conversation have to try and say, okay, I'm willing to have a different look at this. So that's where we start, respecting different views, different rights. I think when it comes to human rights, I think it's important to remember, I know there's a lot of pushback on human rights, but human rights are individual. And the government of Nigeria have also signed up to the human rights conventions. But we also have what is vested, if we talk about the girl child, for instance, the African Charter on the rights of the African child also offers a lot of rights to a child, which is a young woman being forced to marry or a young child being exposed to female genital mutilation, just to use an example. And the African charters are vested in African culture. And so that's a different human rights instrument that we also want to apply and have a conversation around. And then I think one of my favorite quotes is actually one from Gracia Machel that I had the pleasure of engaging with at a point. And she said, and this is, people have heard me say this before, that culture comprises traditions. And traditions are man-made. Therefore, man can change it. And I think that resonated so well with me when I heard an eloquent African leader talking like this, because I think she's right. And what she's also saying is that we cannot use culture an excuse for not changing traditions. So that's where this open-mindedness comes in, because ultimately, if we don't do that, the ones who are left behind are predominantly women and girls. And then we will not honor our commitments.
Well, very strong points that's been made there. So talk to us about this, the key findings of this report. You talked about the 3 dimensions of autonomy that's in the report. Talk to us about some of the key findings.
So I think I would focus probably on the Nigeria points, right? Where we would say that the report presents evidence of the proportion of women in reproductive age, which is from 15 to 49 years, who makes their own decisions regarding healthcare, contraception, and sex with their husbands. And this links up from 2007 to 2018. And as I said, for us, of course, Nigeria is the most interesting set of results. So the proportion of women who reported that they have the power to say no to sex is 70%, which you would actually say is quite high. And you would also say that in Nigeria, there's still a lot of work to be done, because you see significant changes in the indicator about having the right to say yay or nay to whatever you want. So you could say the proportion of women who have the power to decide on contraception stands at 90. And this does not necessarily translate into action. And there is huge state differences. So it really depends on what state we're looking at. So you would have places like Lagos, where you have a higher proportionality, and then you would have other states where it's lower. So I think we need to start looking at where is it. So if you look at the 2018 Demographic Health Survey, which is part of the basis for this, it shows that there's only marginal progress on key family planning and reproductive health indicators. So we've been at a standstill at around 12% contraceptive prevalence rate. And that means the percentage of women in reproductive age who uses a modern method of family planning. So a standstill at 12 and 12% in general is an indicator that there's not that the choice is not as free as we think it is. It also indicates that the country's total fertility rate is very high. So right now it's 5.3, but we have again state discrepancies where we go all the way up to 7.1 in some states, and we are a lot lower in other states. So I think it is important to look at it sort of state by state and not only as a country, and also understand that if you're at 12% contraceptive prevalence rate, and in some states you're down to single-digit prevalence, that's an indication that it's not the woman's choice. Well, it's not necessarily always true, but it is an indication. Yeah.
Okay. Does insecurity affect your findings in any way?
Absolutely, it does. Because there is the situation always changes, I think, when we have insecurity. And that is in Nigeria, obviously, we also know we have high conflict impacted areas. So the report clearly shows and highlights that insecurity and humanitarian crisis negatively affects women's bodily autonomy. But it doesn't cite insecurity as one of the limitations of the findings. On the contrary, it really says that conflict and post-conflict settings are particularly conducive to gender-based violence, which we know already, and we also saw during the COVID crisis, gender-based violence really spiked. It also includes forced and child marriage, that's a higher prevalence. And that is because of the factors such as the breakdown of the rule of law and security. It also changes in traditional gender roles and constraints on the freedom of women and girls. It promotes a culture of impunity, loss of economic and social capital, and even extremist ideologies that encourage the abduction of women and girls into our groups. So yes, it definitely, insecurity affects the outcome of the findings, but as something we should definitely pay attention to and that we have to address.
But one other challenge that one would bring to the table would be that of the limitation of data. Because the report shows conditions in countries where data is available, sometimes data is not available. So is that how in any way would you say that affected the outcome, of the entire process?
Yeah. It's really important, of course, to have solid evidence and data behind it. But I also think a strength of this report is that it actually highlights and indicates the limitations of data in the report. So the report draws mostly on secondary data. It looks over trends over a specific period to be able to make the analysis. But I will say, though, for the demographic health survey from 2018 in Nigeria is very solid data. And then, of course, there is secondary data also that adds to that. So I think for Nigeria, it's mixed, but it is limited access to valid data in many countries can really create challenges. And we have to be careful we don't paint everyone with the same brush. But I do think we have pretty good overall data in Nigeria based on the trends, because we have consistently done the demographic health surveys. So we do have very strong also primary data, I think. Yeah.
Well, we have talked about some key indicators. One of them, which we haven't talked about, is education. We'll take that on when we return from this break. Just stay with us. Well, thanks for staying with us. We still have Olamola with us, resident representative, United Nations Population Fund in Nigeria. Now, we talked about education just before we went on that break. Data shows a strong link between decision-making power and higher levels of education. Could you explain the linkages?
The report, as you rightly say, does highlight that women's level of educational attainment is a key factor in determining how much power she has to say no to sex, but also to her decisions about contraception and healthcare and sort of realizing her full potential. And that is, of course, because the more education you have, the higher your educational attainment, the more you are able to seek out your own information. You're more likely to be fluent in reading and writing. There's a lot of other things that come with education, and you're generally just more informed, and you access information differently, and you can process it differently. So therefore, I think it's not a big surprise that educational attainment is critical. But what's also important here is to notice that it's also the educational level of the partner of the woman, that's of a spouse or a boyfriend, is also positively associated with the participation in decisions about contraception and healthcare. Because just like when women have more information, when men have more information, men also want to have a healthy family. They want to have a healthy partner. They, all of this sort of comes together with the ability to seek information and accurate first-hand information. So I think that's maybe the key differentiator on education, is that ability to seek information, to have different conversations. And we also know that a woman who has less education than her husband, she's also more likely to be subjected to sexual violence. And that's also about the equality that we spoke about a little bit earlier. Yeah. So education is really important, and the evidence also supports that. So the higher education a woman and her partner has, the more is the positive influence.
Well, you talked earlier about how delicate this conversation is. So this next question is kind of going to go in that tangent, but let me begin this way. The report that we're talking about here, titled "My Body is My Own," also documents many other ways that the bodily autonomy of women, men, girls, and even boys is violated. How does this happen?
So, that's a good question. And I think some of it is probably because we also sometimes stray away from having the difficult conversations in order to change. It takes us back to that issue about what is tradition, what is culture, how does it change, how do we do that? Because no culture is the same today as it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But when it comes to bodily autonomy, we very often stray away from having these conversations. So as you said, the report highlighted many of the violations. It also includes slavery, female genital mutilation, as we missed it, but virginity testing, rape, and laws that prevent young people from accessing sexual reproductive health services and information, and laws that do not criminalize rape in marriage, and the list is long. So part of this is, I think, it starts by just sometimes maybe not being brave enough, because it can have dire consequences for the ones who is brave enough. And that is not necessarily me. It has to come from the community. It has to come from, but what we can do is we can support women-led organizations, for instance, to build that community advocacy efforts to also start having those conversations. But it's about not being too scared of addressing the sensitive issues. And these are things about sexuality in most societies across the world are sensitive. But they are also important because it is a big part of our life. So I think a lot of it strays from hiding a little bit and going back to Gracia Michel and saying it comes back to hiding behind culture and tradition. And thus we do not have those so important conversations that changes lives and also, may I say, save lives. Because it's also about preserving lives. Yeah.
You said something about healthy families the other time, and talking about a healthy family would definitely, it's not something one individual can do. So if, for instance, in a family the husband is saying something and the wife is insisting on something else, there could be some form of dysfunction in that family, wouldn't you say?
That is where education comes into the picture, right? Because with education comes broader information. And that is part of equalizing the power dynamics. Because I think we very often take the power dynamics out of this. In many of these relationships we are talking about, the power dynamics are inherently unequal. But so if a woman who is perceived to be inferior to her husband, even if she has solid information that he does not necessarily know about, that can create friction. So it is really important that we think through how we equalize that relationship in those conversations. because both, I mean, men and women we're so different, but when we are good together, the synergy we create is just amazing. And I think one of the arguments we often have, for instance, in families, when you talk to a husband is, if a wife is pregnant every year, first of all, you're likely to lose some of your children. The child mortality also increases. But you also have more cost on healthcare for your children. Even if the wife doesn't go, it impacts on the economy, that if you have children who suffers from stunting, malnutrition, there's a lot of other things. You need more food in the family. So healthcare cost, food cost, educational cost, all of that goes up. Whereas if you have a healthy family, and that's very closely related to spacing your children and making sure that they are healthy and that your wife is healthy before the next pregnancy, that leads to just better economy, also to buy the right food. You need less expenses on healthcare. So that, and you need, less to stretch education expenses over 10 years rather than over 5 years gives you a healthier economy in a family. So those are conversations that I guess maybe diverge the focus a little bit, but talks about all the benefits that we reap when we get this piece right. And I think that evens the playing field a little bit. So I think that's about, again, it's about changing perspective sometimes, but have the conversation. Yeah.
Well, it's something necessary and quite critical, just as you have said. I mean, you said that there is no culture that is exactly the way it was 100 years ago today. But then it is also a fact that there are certain practices in those cultures and traditions that will not change for 100 years. Take polygamy, for instance. How soon before we begin to have that kind of conversation take root to the point that it'll change. So some of those cultures still definitely have a strong hold on how effectively we can communicate some of the ideals of this report. So in having this conversation, how do you propose we start?
I think we start by finding out what is our common, where do we agree? What do we agree on? Because I think we very often in our conversations, we start by talking about what we disagree on. And I don't think that's very constructive. I think we start by looking at what do we agree on? And I'm yet to meet a father or a husband who does not agree that he wants healthy children, who does not agree that he would like his wife to be healthy or his wives to be healthy, that he would like to be prosperous, that he would like to look after his family because that's about his dignity. So I think let's start by looking at what do we agree on? And then what is in the way of getting to that point? So if we start with what we agree on and say, okay, so what impacts negatively to get us there? Then we have that conversation and then we find a way forward on how we then get there. That way we build on what we have in common. And, we have so many things in common, just as by the virtue of being humans. But when we do that, we then continuously work on changing norms and changing values that have negative impact. And we do that because we focus on the positive impact we want to achieve. And it is much easier to get progress if we focus on the positive outcomes rather than starting a blaming culture because no one benefits from that. And one thing is for sure, women will not benefit from that. So if we have that conversation and put on how can we positively impact on women's health and well-being, and what is the positive impact that has on family health and our husband's health and children's health, I think that is a way to start. And maybe just the last point on this is to strengthen programs that really prevent human rights violations. So for instance, one of the things you have seen us really promoting and advocate is domestication of the Violence Against People's Prohibitions Act. It's all about strengthening programs that really addresses human rights violations and work with girls and boys from a very early age also to change their perception. Because it starts in childhood. It's about how we're brought up, how men view women, and to have that, instill that respect for women and girls as equals from childhood, so that we provide equal opportunities for women and men as we grow into adulthood, and to provide opportunities so that women can be part of decision-making processes, especially decisions around her own body. So let's start by what we have in common.
From the population point of view, does this report take cognizance of the fact that a family could be a man and a woman, a man and 3 women, a man and 5 women, or 20 women in some cases?
Yeah. So, I think this is one of the report doesn't really go deeply into that, and I don't think it should. I think what is important is that the women, as is also outlined, for instance, in the Quran, the women have to agree to that lifestyle. That's also about her decision-making powers and the right to make her own choices. So I don't think that is not the key area to address here. I think it's all about, no matter how you decide to set up your family, it's about respecting every right that each individual member of the family has. And I think that's where we start. And
so,
it's very clear. You don't lose your rights just because you're in a family where you have 20 women. You haven't lost your right as an individual woman. And I think that's what we have to remember.
What would you say are the solutions to these problems which are raised in the report?
Sorry, what? I didn't hear that very clearly.
So what would you say are the solutions to these problems that are raised in the report?
Yeah. So I think I would repeat what I spoke about earlier, this issue about finding what we agree on. Where do we agree? And then what is in the way to getting us to where we are all in agreement of what we would like our family unit, our society, our country to look like, so that we continuously work again on changing norms and values that have that negative impact on women's health and well-being by switching to focusing on the positive impact of women's health and well-being on any community and society. Because when we look at the end results, I am convinced from my 30 years of experience here, we all want to have the same. We all want to have a healthy family. We all want to have prosperous societies. We all want to have our children to be healthy and survive. We all think that a mother should see her child grow up. There's so many things we agree on. And dealing with this particular issue around decision-making power is part of the solution to get us to what we want the world to look like, which we all agree on.
Well, how do we factor in the young population into this conversation? Of course, you would know that we have a youth bulge in Africa, almost the same number of females as males, almost the same. So what kind of conversations should we be having with the younger generation in taking this further from here?
Yeah. So first of all, I know, and the United Nations use that too very often. We talk about a youth bulge. I think we have to change that word. What we have in the world today, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, in particular in Nigeria, is we have one of the most resourceful generations we've had for a long, long time. We have a lot of young people who want to make a difference. We have a lot of young people who know how to use, the mobile phone and social media platforms. They know so many things. I think we need to start inviting them in. That's another change in culture. Inviting them in and letting them also be part of the conversation. Let them be part of the solution, because we need to start seeing again the young people as the solution, not as a problem to be solved. We also need to listen to them, because a lot of the things that we're talking about here, they become sensitive when we get older. A lot of the young people have these conversations between them. So what's important is that when we have our grandchildren, so I have grandchildren, right? When we have them, we talk about equality between men and women. We talk about how important it is you make your own decisions about your own body, so that the next generation grow up with that. And when you talk to young people today, the conversations they have between them they're much more open, much more free. We become more shy and more private as we grow up, as we get older. I'm sure you can recognize some of this if you look at your own conversations through life. They change. So I think let us listen to also what the young people have to say. And a lot of the young people that I speak to, they understand all of this. Their challenge is to come in and be part of the solution at the decision-making table so that they can access, for instance, contraception, even if they are not married, but just in partnership. So let's listen to them a bit more and open up again, listening to them, bring them to the table, and see them as part of the solution, not as a problem to be solved.
You also mentioned something earlier about the power dynamics. And that, in a way, also exposes the vulnerabilities of mostly underprivileged people in every society, especially, in a country like Nigeria. It's pretty difficult it's pretty difficult to find your voice when you are underprivileged and dependent on people. So in the light of this report, how do we factor in these dynamics in the conversation of being underprivileged and dependent while at the same time wanting to find your voice?
Yeah. So this is where this point I had about, first of all, finding out what we agree on, but also really working in communities, working through, for instance, women-led organizations or youth-led organizations, and let them be the one who carves out that platform where we can start advocating and bring change to the table. And also be realistic about, we cannot change things overnight. It is going to be a process. And yes, it is difficult when you are dependent because you can be scared of raising your voice. But that's where I also think the ones with the most resources, we have an obligation. So I'm brought up by a mom who, in a society that's very different from the one, if I go home today, I'm home right now. But my mom was from a middle-class background. But she instilled that in me, that it's my obligation to help people and support people who cannot necessarily raise their own voice. So I have to lend my voice until they're able to do so. And that's what I'm grown up to say. And I think that's the same model we're using when we work through civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, is that they lend their voice to the voiceless. And in Nigeria, you have some phenomenal organizations who really lend their voice to the voiceless, exactly the ones who are dependent. And they are slowly but surely changing the lives for the women who needs their support the most. And the beauty of that is that it's done by Nigerian organizations, for the Nigerian people, for the Nigerian women. And that's what creates ownership and sustainability. It's Nigerian-led.
Well, we certainly have to thank you very much for your time and thoughts this morning. Ola Miola is Resident Representative, United Nations Population Fund in Nigeria. Once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a lovely weekend.
And you as well. We're back in a moment. Do stay with us.
Thank you for staying with us. Now we're going to discuss that favorite topic of ours,
Take it away.
It's towards sustainable electricity. We've been talking about electricity forever, and we're not going to stop talking about it
until
soon.
We have it. Until we have it sustainably. We won't stop talking about it.
Very correct.
Yeah.
And that's what we're all about this morning. Power outages. They have been a major subject forever. And most recently, there have been blackouts across the country. And the Minister of Power, Sally Mammon, apologized for the power outages and revealed that the reason was because of the breakdown of the national integrated power plants supplying electricity to the national grid. We also hear that this has a thing or two to do with the supply of gas. Well, we have an expert in the studio this morning who's going to help us analyze all of this and clarify things for us. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Odion Omofoman.
Good morning, and thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Mr. Omofoman is an energy expert and is the Chief Executive Officer of New Hampshire Capital Limited.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for joining us this morning. Are you sure you're ready for all the fireworks that's going to come to you, both from us and from people at home?
Sure. I think we just need to be logical about the power situation in the country and start to think of very sensible solutions to solving the problem.
There is no doubt that there is no logic in loss of resources that is avoidable.
Sure.
You know, the micro, small, and medium business owner whose business has gone under because of avoidable power outage cannot be logical at this point because his banker is not going to be logical. The people working with him is not going to be logical.
At the end of the month.
At the end of the month. So
Yeah.
how do we explain that?
Okay, so I also am part of the businesses that suffer from these power outages.
So let's begin from there.
We're on reliable power. But however, we need to, first of all, take 2 steps back and then look at where the problem or problems lie and how we can move forward if there's even a path forward in the way and manner is structured. We all know the problems of the power sector, high technical and collection losses. But beyond those losses, I think you have issues of corporate governance across the sector. You have regulatory issues as well. And then you have what I call structural issues with the power sector. In fact, all the issues you see in terms of financial challenges, illiquidity of the market, is pretty much as a result of the underlying structural issues with the power sector market, because the power sector is a market as is, where people produce and people enjoy the service and they pay. So there's a structural challenge there which needs to be sorted in various ways. Now, first things first, let's look at the 2020 statistics just to put things in very plain perspective. We had power is produced by generation companies, either hydros or gas-based gencos. We don't have coal-fired gencos. Neither do we have solar gencos that are connected to the grid. They produce these electrons. TCN transmits the electrons, and we have the distribution company who serves the last mile customers, you and I, right? That's one flow of the market. The other flow of the market is cash. We then enjoy the service and pay. So money then goes up the value chain again. Somehow, somewhere, between the generation and your house, there is a loss, huge loss, as a result of all sorts of technical issues. And then when you're paying your money, there's also a loss as a result of all sorts of human issues, non-efficiency of collections, and people just really avoiding to pay their bills and stealing electricity. So once you put that in a market, you have a gap. So let's look at the statistics. These generators invoice, they produce electricity worth 730 billion naira, which they sold. Now, in 2020. So I'm reading 2020 stats. Yeah, in the year. They produced 730 billion. So to produce that electricity, they had to buy gas from Shell, ITU, and all the other gas producers, and also had to pay water management fees to the federal government for the hydros. And then guess what they were paid? They were paid 320 billion. So there's a shortfall. If we were a generator,
less than half.
Yes, you have a shortfall of over 400 billion on one side of the value chain, the side that produces the electricity we all consume. Then on the distribution side, the distribution companies got whatever energy they got from TCN and then sold to us. And they billed us a total of about 816 billion naira. Having billed us that, they were only able to receive 542 billion, which they collected from us.
Another 300 billion.
That's the first loss. Actually, the loss started from the billing, because the billing efficiency, they did not bill for the entire energy that they got from TCN. There's a billing efficiency of 70%. That means a 30% gap from the billing. So you have a loss as well.
Not the collection.
Not the collection, just the billing alone. So maybe 3 of us consumed electricity. They were only able to bill two of us. You got free energy or whatever.
Oh yes, I always get free energy.
And then having collected 542 billion, what do they remit back upstream? Because they pay...
because they're also owing.
They're also owing.
TCN.
Yes, TCN and the Gencos. They paid the market 220 billion, leaving a gap of about 510 billion. So if you are in that market, you cannot operate. You're literally stifled. That is where the problems, and like I keep saying, that's a structural issue that we must address.
Mr.
Right? There are
Moffat.
also technical issues as well, but pretty much what we have today, these blackouts and the outrage, as we so say, is arising from all that.
Mr. Moffat, one would expect that since this these discos were privatized, that they would have put mechanisms in place so that there will not be so many gaps up and down the chain. They would have to spend money so that they will be able to collect adequate funds for the power that they supply. So who's to blame for all these gaps going up and going down?
I think there's been enough blame since privatization was concluded about 7 years ago. And you're absolutely correct. The core reason for privatization was the fact that private investors were supposed to come in and make these investments and then get us to efficiency. But we've seen that has not happened for a number of reasons, which I don't think I want to go into. But the more important thing is that we have a structural problem. And let me give you a very classic example of the structural problem that we face. On the generation side, we have excess generation. You might not believe it, but there are enough generation plants in this country to serve our needs as we speak. We're not even talking about...
Yes. You must be joking.
I'm not joking. We have enough generation plants to serve.
We have enough generation plants.
We do not have
enough
a
generation capacity?
Yes, we do.
Do we have enough generation?
I would explain that. But let me just get through my chain of thought and I'll come back to that. We have enough generation plants and enough capacity, right, to meet our energy needs. And the reason why you have that is because there's competition at the generation level. So the federal government, besides the federal government plants, which are the NIPPs, owned by the Niger Delta Holding Company, and then 1 or 2 power plants built recently by the federal government. You've got private generators, Azura, the Olorin Shogos, the Geregus, privatized plants, the Egbins. And then you then have a monopoly, transmission, and you then create private monopolies at distribution, the last mile. This is where the challenge is, that bottleneck where you have excess generation and then guess what? You then have monopolies who are unable to fund, take the power that is generated and effectively and optimally distribute it and collect the revenues, right? So that is the first structural problem. So I think the way to start to address this is beyond what the federal government is doing, and they're doing a great work in terms of providing funding for the power sector, which again, is an anomaly because if you say you privatized, why are you then funding the power sector?
Exactly.
The federal government, through the CBN, has funded the power sector in 5 years about 2 trillion naira in funding. 2 trillion naira. I mean, we can calculate that. But that hasn't gone anywhere. Unfortunately, we'll pay that 2 trillion naira from our tariffs. So what I think needs to start to happen is we need to infuse competition at the last mile of the value chain, which is at the distribution side. And the only way to do that is that you need to decentralize electricity regulation. That's what I call energy federalism. So for instance, you've talked about the small businesses. The small businesses are in the states. They actually drive the state economy. As a matter of fact, the federal government, if you were to use the treaty of government, the federal government really can't say they have electricity customers, maybe except the ones that are on the TCN, on the direct TCN connection, the big companies like Dangote and Co. But the bulk of the customers are within the states. So it then...
So they're served by discos?
Yes. Okay. And you've then created monopolies, private monopolies at state level, such that the states are sort of hindered from going ahead to serve electricity efficiently to their population. But that's an anomaly in itself, because if you looked at the Constitution, and I'll be very precise. There's this conversation that states cannot get into electricity. Electricity is for the federal government. Absolutely not true. The Constitution recognizes electricity as a shared obligation between the federal and the state, and that's why I put it in the concurrent list. So if you looked at Section 13 and 14, Part 2 of the Constitution, it talks about electricity. And it's very interesting that at the federal level, the Constitution actually says generation and transmission belongs to the federal government. It never mentioned distribution, except distribution amongst the Nigeria and our neighbors. But Section 14 says state House of Assemblies can make law for electricity and also for electricity generation, transmission, and distribution. It specifically mentions distribution when it talks about states, the laws, the electricity laws state houses can make.
It sounds to me, Mr. Omofman,
You know?
that you're saying that
but there's a
the
caveat.
law
Yeah.
is a problem here. Don't answer that one yet. Let's take this break. We'll be right back. Well, thanks for staying with us. Yeah, there's this interesting question that I can't answer it like. I can't ask it like you. No, seriously.
Yes, we were talking about the federal government and the states houses of assembly having to do something about, power. And I recalled that in the early 2000s or so, Lagos State was actually supplying power, which came from Enron, and they had them on barges somewhere around Lagos. So what happened to that, and why did the state government suddenly lose zeal to fight to wrest this ability to supply power to their people from the federal government?
In the light of that law that you quoted.
Okay, excellent. So along those laws, that's why the Lagos State government, early 2000s, started the AES badge, which was, I think, a 270 megawatts power badge. Now, what Lagos State was looking at doing was islanding the entire Lagos State. In other words, they'll put that badge and then they would generate the power and then distribute across Lagos and sell. But remember, 2000, 2001, we had a behemoth called NEPA. And NEPA was a vertical company that controlled generation, transmission, distribution.
Everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
So it was almost impossible for Lagos to put that badge and then distribute the power. So
but the Constitution at that time said what you said earlier.
Yes, but what the Constitution says was that you can generate, transmit, distribute power to areas not covered by the grid. But Lagos wanted to island the whole of Lagos. So there was a conflict with the federal government or under the then leadership. Beyond that, there was also a Power Sector Reform Act in the works at then. And what the federal government had said was that act would address some of these inefficiencies. So that act ended up splitting NEPA into PHN.
And it still didn't address the situation.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Even though the AES badge was brought in, supplied power, the federal government ended up buying the power and then selling, it does not stop. State governments, in my view, need to start to look at that section of the Constitution and start to decentralize electricity regulation. Because what decentralizing electricity regulation will do is that it will then create the environment that the federal government has already used to attract investments in the power sector at state level, where you then control the electricity generation, distribution, transmission, distribution within your state in partnership, in collaboration with the federal government. So this is not a law that should conflict with what the existing structure.
Yeah.
It should be complementary, because you have a lot of people that are unserved. Guess what? This entire power sector we're talking about, we have less than 12 million customers. But we're a country of 200 million people. So all this talk is about...
Less than 12 million?
Say that again.
Yes, 12 million customers.
Oh, 200 million?
Yes. You've got households in excess of 40 million. So we haven't even scratched the power sector. The MITO, the tariff projections project that you have 9% annual growth of electricity customers. So we're growing. Just look around you see the houses springing up. So we haven't even started. You've got areas that are underserved and unserved.
So can you explain to us, please, why states are not fighting to do this, to make their people happy?
I'm not sure why, but some states have woken up. For instance, Lagos State, I know under the last dispensation before the current governor, and I think the present commissioner of energy in Lagos State is also working towards it. The Lagos State tried to pass an electricity act. That act was very encompassing, where the act would create a regulatory agency in Lagos State that would regulate electricity, and also like a board that would work with the existing structure set up by the federal government to generate, distribute, and collect for electricity. I'm not sure why that law wasn't passed, and I'm not sure what the status of the law is today. I'll need to refresh to find out. But other state governments are pushing. So, for instance, Edo State, which is incidentally my state, there's a 50 megawatt power plant, the Osioma power plant, which the governor has, in conjunction with private investors, they've built. And that power plant is supposed to serve government residences. The challenge they've had is beyond government offices, you need to also get the power to other areas in Benin. But there's one monopoly there that says, I own the network. Benin Electricity. You can't sell power under my nose to my customers. Never mind the fact that I'm not serving my customers as optimally as I can, even though I know they're doing their best, but you just can't sell power. There's a law that prevents you from selling power to Odeon or to somebody else, you know. So that's where they're stuck. Now, I think that states should go the route of creating their own state electricity regulatory commissions that will then put in place some of these regulations and laws that would do that synergy between the existing monopolies and what the states can do. In other words, distributing those powers to areas that are unserved or underserved.
Suppose this one that the Edo government is building was to serve those areas. Would there have been any palaver with the existing disco?
What areas are you referring to?
The unserved.
Okay, so again, the way power works is at the end of the day, you need to sell power. You need to pay for power at the end of the day, and which comes back to the initial topic. So Edo State government would have to start from where the power is most needed, which is your industrial areas.
Okay.
Because those are the people.
And they are served already.
Well, some of them are served, and I know they're creating an industrial park where they'll sell some of that power there. But existing industries, you want to push power there. You know, you really want to sell. Now, it's a very simple solution. My take would have been the existing disco would supplement whatever it gets from the grid, whatever the Edo State power plant gives to it, and then they will serve this customer. But for some reasons, they've not been able to reach an agreement. But that's how the law should work, where there's a collaboration. Again, this is not a competition, a collaboration between the state regulators and the federal regulators in line, and collaborate with the market participants at state level, at federal level, to give us power. Competition.
Given the example of Lagos, and given some of the things that happen between the federal government and state governments at various levels in various other sectors, how do you see that working?
Again, we need to create an atmosphere of collaboration. You see, the federal government cannot do it all alone.
But the federal government has all the power by law, so to speak.
I wouldn't say they have all the powers by law,
well,
right?
If the laws, because I believe that, I want to believe that the state governors know all the laws, all the powers that they have per law. And for them to not have access to those things, is it a problem then of law or of politics?
That's an interesting question. I would cancel politics because I'll try as much as possible not to make this political.
Okay.
Let me abide with the CBN governor's directive that we shouldn't make certain things political. I would say it's a function of how we've interpreted the law, right? The existing laws. So people at federal level, they've interpreted it to mean that you cannot have state electricity regulatory commissions, which somewhere in the law, it actually makes provisions for. People at the federal have said, do you know what? Okay, You can generate 1 megawatt and below. You don't need to come to Abuja to get a license. But anything above 1 megawatt, you have to run to Abuja and tell us why you need to generate 1 megawatt and above. The other problem is, okay, if you have succeeded in demonstrating that your power plant shouldn't get above 1 megawatt, can you distribute and sell that 1 megawatt? No, you can't, because there's a federal law that says you can only distribute 100 kilowatt hour. 100 kilowatt hour is not enough to run these channels premises. It's not enough. So you can imagine the constraint where you've succeeded in building 1 megawatt. You didn't go to Abuja, but you then have to find a way to sell your 1 megawatt to many people that require it. Because there's a law that says you can't do more than 100. So those are the things that the state governors, particularly the Nigerian Governors Forum, should start to address. If we were to talk about federalism, energy federalism is extremely key. We see the effect of it every day.
But at this point, it's still a problem of law. Let's talk about, I mean, that's so far as you have told us. Let's talk about this NIPP that, went under. I'm wondering what you think caused that in the first place. 8 plants, all at the same time. Okay, we hear one of them was under maintenance. Let's assume that was scheduled, okay, and it was supposed to be going on. But 7 all went under at about the same time. Is that a problem of effectiveness or efficiency or a lack of it?
Let me carefully phrase my words. I would say the minister's tweet may have been misunderstood. Why do I say so? Power plants just don't break down like that. Power plants consist of several turbines. You could have 1 turbine going down, but to have 4 turbines or 5 turbines going down at the same time is a rarity. You would have completely mismanaged our power plants. I also know that the owners of those power plants, some of the power plants that were mentioned are actually private, or under private ownership, like Egbin. It's not under the NIPP or IBOM. IBOM is owned by the Akwa Ibom government. But the ones that were mentioned, the NIPP plants, they're managed by the Niger Delta Power Holding Company, which is a supposedly private entity, well, public entity owned by the state government and federal government. And I know they do a good job managing their plants. So that's why I say very carefully that the minister may have been misunderstood. Having said that, these power plants are gas-based, are thermal power plants. If you do not have the feedstock to produce electricity, you cannot produce electricity. And for them, their feedstock is gas. So if there's no gas to run those turbines, you cannot have electricity. So what I suspect has been the issue in the last couple of weeks, where we've had this very erratic and poor power supply, where generation has dropped from the average of 4,000 megawatts to maybe 2,000 or 3,000 megawatts, is because we haven't had, it's a combination of factors. First of all, this is the end of the dry season, so the hydros that pretty much give us our base loads, water levels, they have to manage it. So in other words, they probably run 1 turbine. But the gas gencos may not have had adequate gas. So the question is, why don't they have adequate gas at this point in time? I can tell you gas is, we have excess gas in this country. And we have enough pipelines to get this gas to the power plants. The issue, it didn't start today, the issue has always been the ability of the gencos to pay for the gas. Keep in mind, the gencos do not produce their gas. They buy their gas from the Shells, the gas producers. Those gas producers have inputs, cost inputs as well, to produce that gas. Never mind the fact they're flaring, and they flare under regulation anyway.
Exactly.
But
you say we have enough, and yet we don't have enough.
We don't have enough for the power sector because what has been supplied to date, there's a lot of, nobody has collected the money to pay the gas producer. So the gas producer is running at a loss. Keep in mind what I told you about the generation companies invoicing the sector 730 billion and they were paid 300 and something billion, 400. How would they pay the gas producer? So I think there's an accumulation of bills or debts at the gas side, and the gas companies have simply said, you know, we're just going to turn off the taps.
Let me ask you
and
this.
hope to get payments.
Each of these companies pay taxes, right? Now, I'm wondering, are these Gencos who are unable to pay for gas, are they all private, public?
Combination of private and public.
How culpable are the public Gencos?
I would say they are culpable to the extent that they also get paid for the power that they produce.
By us?
Yes.
And do they pay taxes to the federal government?
Oh, yes, they do. They pay taxes.
They collect money from the federal government to work for us and still pay taxes to the federal government. Why don't they use their tax money to pay the gas companies? So that we can have power.
You know, the way the federation, we're in a federation made up of federal, state, and local. And in that federation, there's certain entities that report to the federation and there's certain entities that report to the federal government. The FIRS reports to the federation. The FIRS will not allow for that. Yes, you can do some form of tax incentives, but tax incentives are based on either you're having pioneer status, which I don't think any of them have anymore because they may have exhausted it, or you're doing something like the, I think it's Executive Order 7 or 10, where you can do infrastructure and you get a tax rebate because that infrastructure would have been done by the tax. For electricity, you have consumed, you should pay. The question is, are you paying the right price for it? Or are you getting the right service? Right?
We're certainly not getting the right service.
You talked
the consumer is certainly not getting the right service.
Mr. Hoffman, that you talked about the efficiency or a lack of it of the regulator. There's huge questions on my mind. You guys who are experts in this field will tell us that we shouldn't compare the telecom sector with the energy sector. You said we should not, all right? But they are both services. They are not products. They are both technical. Well, maybe one is more technical than the other. Maybe one is more complex than the other. Yeah. But at the end of the day, what we, the people, want is service to be served right. As and when tariffs have been raised, people pay tariffs, they still do not get the services. Yep. In some cases, you talked about the 12 million. I don't know how many of those 12 million customers of discos in Nigeria today are on prepaid meters. I don't think they're up to 1 million. If they're up to 1 million, they're not up to 2 million. So people get estimated billings all over the place, and they still do not get the kind of service. So what exactly do we expect the people to do? Because clearly, no quantum of explanation will
satisfy the consumer.
Your question is, again, I'm a consumer and I feel the pain. And I will speak from my point of pain, but also I'll try as much as possible to speak as an expert as well. The consumer, a consumer like me, I want to pay for electricity I get. And I use electricity a lot. But however, we have a situation where some days I don't even have electricity, and some days I have, and then it blinks, and then maybe when I'm getting ready to use it for another purpose, it goes off. Unreliable. So there's a reluctance to pay because you're not getting the service you want.
You're frustrated.
Right? There's a frustration. So that frustration has built up. Now, to ameliorate that frustration, your prepaid meter has come in. So before I had a prepaid meter, I was extremely frustrated because whether you had electricity or not, you were billed. And it was like a fight to go get my meter. I eventually paid to get it. And then when I got it, it sort of reduced the frustration, but you still need electricity to work. The only thing is that is that you're not paying for
not having
it. Yeah. But that after a while, that goes away, that frustration builds up. The real issue here is we need to address some of those structural problems like I mentioned, where your billing efficiency is 74%. I mean, you got 100% power, you build 74, and then out of that 74% you build, you're only able to collect less than just above 60%. That's a huge gap. So there has to be some efficiency around that. The other issue is that we need to have discos who can bring in the financial muscle, because a lot of these problems you have, your feeder could have electricity, there could be power, but your transformer is out. Maybe one fuse, and then it takes 5 days for somebody to fix. So I think we need to make investments in this sector, but the federal government cannot be the only party making the investments. States must start to create the enabling laws that would allow investments in electricity sectors at their state level.
Well, you are an expert in this area. So are you making any effort to convince the states that they can actually do this?
Yes, so my company, we're currently in conversations with some state governors trying to structure ways how they can take advantage of some of the regulations or some of the provisions of the Constitution, and how they can best structure the electricity markets within their states. Again, this is complementary to what the federal government or what the federal structure is. Okay. It's not a competition. So we're working with some state governors to make sure they get that right.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Odiono Mofaman. Well, he's an energy expert, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of New Hampshire Capital Limited. Thank you for coming to, well, would I say clarify? Okay, is it clearer? Maybe. Well, we
know what the problem is.
We have been educated a bit more about exactly what is going on, but still, there is no power.
There's no power.
Okay. We shall be back in just a moment with the home stretch. See you in just a moment.
Why are you looking at me like that? You're talking with our artist of the week. She's a singer, songwriter, and public speaker, a graduate of mass communication from the prestigious Covenant University, and has been called to proclaim the mystery of Christ by calling the hearts of men to God. She's had several songs to her credit, which include My Goal, among others. I'm happy to welcome to the studio, Christy. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Is it? And my partner did ask whether it was Christy or Christy.
It's a question.
Christy?
It's a question. Is it Christy or Christy?
It's Christy. It's Christy.
But you can understand. Okay, haven't there been people who called you,
Yes, people call me Christy. Some say Christy.
Well, and my partner takes something fake sometimes, so I think today is one of those days. He's tried that fake stuff,
It's always good to
people, they do that. Sometimes.
They call you Christy?
Yes, sometimes, yes.
Oh,
so I have to pause like, no, it's not Christy, it's Christy.
And not Chris.
And not Chris.
You see? She just told you.
No, she's not Chris. She's Christy.
Christy. Not Christy. I'm telling you now, not Christy.
I take note. So, Christy.
See? I warned you. I just said it right now.
Ayo, will you please stop confusing me? Thank you. So, Christy, how did you get into music? You studied mass communications. Yes. So, when did you stray away from the straight and narrow?
Okay, I will not call it stray. I'm born into a family of singers, father, mother, siblings, everyone sings.
So why were you studying mass communications?
So, I've always had a dream to be on the screen, although in a different way, having programs, running independent programs and all that. But sometimes when you decide something, and as you grow up, God begins to show you the other side, or as you grow up, you start to evolve. The more you evolve, the more you find out, okay, I think this and this, I think I can combine this and this, or I think my strength is here or there.
Okay, so you have been singing since you were a child?
Yes, from the children's choir to the youth choir to the adult choir. I've just been singing all my life.
At what point did you decide to take singing seriously?
Okay. I would say, I think that question should be, because I have different sides to it. At what point did you know that it's like a ministry? I've always taken it seriously.
Okay.
I've always taken it seriously, something I love doing, expressing my heart to God. But there was a point where someone told me, did you see that, what happened when you were singing? I was like, what? Like, seriously? And she was like, no, I'm not going to talk to you. I have to come to your house. She came to my house, a very good friend, started talking to me. I was like, and I was shedding tears. So at that point, and I told God, if someone can see this about me, why don't I see for myself? Then I said, I now said to myself, I have to take it. Now is a ministry because it's doing something to the heart of people. There's a healing it brings, and the testimonies that abound, and I promise God that.
You know, when you take chocolate, it gives you a feeling.
Yes.
When you take a particular brand of soft drink that you like,
Yes.
it gives you a different feeling from one that you are compelled to take.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Now, so what's the unique value proposition of Christy and her ministry?
Spiritual content. The spiritual content that is given by God himself, in the sense that there are points where I've written and there are songs that have been given. So I am in a stage where songs are given, not written. So it's like pouring out what has been given.
My question here is, what's the core message that you're passing, you know, because every minister will say they have spiritual content and all of that, right? Yes. So what's it that makes your ministry unique? What's the core message?
That God is the center. No matter what you do. The word of God says in the beginning was God. But sometimes when we start up in life, we want to live like we don't need God. The God factor there is in the beginning. God purpose is the beginning. Now, when you were able to find God, you're able to discover self, then you're able to find purpose. So my music is just bringing back people to the God factor in worship, and then in life situations when you go through things. There's a message to tell you that without God as the core, you can't just get through it, no matter how powerful you may seem to be, because actually you are part of God.
But you know, this thing that you're saying is so easy to say. You know from experience as well, I bet, that, you know, this thing about discovering self is a tug of war, if I can use the term.
Yes.
You know, getting to the point where you say you know this and you have to go to God, you have bills to pay, you have challenge in the marriage, you are looking for a child, you're looking for a job, all is taking a lot longer than your age is telling you, and someone comes, or rather Christy comes and says, go to God. How easy is that?
The person talking to you has been processed by God. I'm a product of a process of, not me, everyone is a product of a certain process.
Exactly.
So when you come to me, and I will refer you to how God took me through, because that's my experience, that's my testimony. That's something that's tangible. It's an experience that it's not fables. So taking you back to God is because there's nothing that you're going through that has not already been packaged by God for a way out. You came from God. Even Jesus, the story of Jesus trying to get people back to God and all that, he went through a process, he went through a rigor. So everyone born of a woman on earth will have a process. It's just that people have their different processes. So, but your healing right now, the absolute healing, is God. In the word of God, how do you get healing? I remember the times I had my process. I would sit and cry and wail. I'm like, God. And then I listened. I have a mentor. I love that woman so much, Shirley Caesar. All her songs, the words had something it did to my spirit. There's a particular, I lost my mother very early in life. There's a particular one that would say, strong man, you better live here because you're wasting your time. Take your hands off my child. So it was like she was talking to me. So there's no how you can leave God out of your life. So No matter what you go, yes, you have bills to pay, even divine ideas. He's the one to give it. How to get money. The Bible says, I wish above all things that you may be in wealth, even as your soul prospereth. So the thing is, there's a side of discovering self. There's another side of discovering who God wants you to be. Two different ways. And that's why sometimes when we discover self, what we think we like you asked me what you think we like, what we want to flow, and then as you proceed in life, there is a signal that, okay, there's a stronger message you're called in this direction, and you should. And then you find that as you go, not that there will not be challenges, life will always have challenges. Like the rich, the mighty, no matter how, people always will have challenges.
Yes.
So the lasting healing, God created man in a way that we can't exist without him. So the real healing and the real strength is God.
Okay.
No,
we'll take that a little further. Just one moment. Let's take a message. We'll be back. Sure that you have had the best of that music here, but very quick one. We still have Christy with us this morning. But just a quick information that members of the public have been visiting Windsor early this morning to pay tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh ahead of his funeral.
His coffin, covered with a wreath, his sword, naval cap, and his personal standard, has been moved from Windsor Castle's private chapel to the inner hall ahead of his funeral.
Was moved by a bearer party from the Queen's Company, 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards. Philip had a close association with the regiment, serving as colonel of the Guards for 42 years.
The funeral of Prince Philip takes place at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle at 3 o'clock, British Central Time. The Duke of Edinburgh's unwavering loyalty to the Queen, service to the nation, and courage will be celebrated at his funeral. Prince Philip died at Windsor Castle on Friday, April the 9th, aged 99.
But, of course, we'll bring you more on that as the day progresses. We still have Christy with us this morning. Just before we go, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Christy, you say that your music is actually a ministry. So at what point does the ministry become a business? Because you're also living off this music that you're making.
Yes. People sell their music too. You put it into CD and then but for everyone that goes into gospel music, you should have your pattern, how you run with it. Okay, so for me, it's first of all to be a blessing. You're invited to a place and you're a blessing. There is no how people will get ministered to and you would walk away. So I usually don't do the business, although at the end of the day, money is not the drive, the business is not the drive, but when I want to put in quality, spirit of excellence, I do it as business. But when it comes to it looks dicey, but the truth is, at the end of the day, it is quality you're looking at. When you get quality, the rest will follow.
Quality costs money, that's what you're saying.
Yes, of course I've spent a lot. I do spend a lot of money. I spend a lot of money. But I know that at the end of the day, if, for example, you go to a place and you sing and people clap and you leave. The second one, you go to a place and you finish singing and for weeks the song rings in the spirit of people. It has done something to them. So it's now more than the present moment so it has the ability to open more doors. So that's...
Is that all you do, music?
No, I'm also a businesswoman. I mentor young ladies called the Sisters Army for young ladies, single ladies, because it's, like I said, it's a process. See, God will not give you an assignment without, first of all, making you pass through that process so that you gain capacity to be able to impact whatever you are supposed to impact to the younger generation. So I'm a young lady who passed through a process of loving and following hard after God, and He paid off so well. That's why I keep saying it's still back to God. No matter what you go to, there's nowhere it's simple. Okay, so I mentor them into believing in themselves, realizing that life, there's this ideal that just get married and for a young lady. But life is not about marriage. The most important thing is not about marriage. The most important thing is finding you. You're able to find what you're called for, then you're getting into marriage to add, not to take, not to get, but something you want to add. So it's like a mind shift that, okay, you're not called female to just go have children and get out. No. Your life is so much more than that, but you have to build it when you're single. So it's what you build when you're single that eventually enhance when you get married. But it's just unfortunate sometimes, most times, that our singles, they just take their time to just enjoy themselves and then have fun and then get married. Not realizing that when you marry a man, you're actually giving another assignment to help a man as well as don't stay behind a man.
Plenty of work there, but very, very quickly. Is there any particular thing you're working? You have 30 seconds. Any particular thing you're working on now that we should look forward to?
I'm working on the video of, although I have a song that just came out, I Shall Leave. Just go to crystalsings.com. You get every other song I've done all through the years for like 10, 15 years now. But I'm looking forward to this particular song. The audio is out, I believe. This video should be coming out very soon. And I promise you it will be a blessing.
Okay. Well, it's good to have you here, Christy. Thank you so much for...
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, for being a part of this program this morning, and we can only wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
And Christy brings to a close today's Sunrise. I wish you all the best through the following week. And please don't forget, even though we didn't talk about it today, the virus is still roaming around the streets. You still have to wear your mask and wash your hands and sanitize your hands and keep social distance. I wish you all the best. See you next Saturday with a fresh edition. I'm Alero Edu.
I'm Ayo Makine. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.